We've been paused for about a month, but I'm glad to see everybody again. Let's see, Stacy, would you open us in prayer? Okay.
Heavenly and gracious God, we just come together in fellowship and just eager hearts and hungry hearts to just learn who you are and what your scripture says. Father, we just praise you and we just ask that you anoint Brian as he is teaching and leading us and explaining things to us, and let our minds and our hearts just take it in and understand it. Father, for those that are not with us tonight, we just pray that you meet them where they are. Those that are here, I say thank you for getting them here. It's been a little while since we have been in fellowship and learning and New Year, and we're just ready to gear back up and see what you have got for us. We know this is by no accident that we're all here, and we just thank you for bringing Grant to us tonight, and I pray that you'll bring him back. In your precious Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. So, I know there's a lot of current events that have been going on in the last month, and we usually talk about those in light of prophecy, but we'll again save that discussion towards the end. This is a big chapter. It's one of the more cryptic chapters in the Bible, and a lot of people have studied it at length. So I don't know if we're going to get through the whole chapter tonight, but we're going to do our best. All right, now, who can read for me? We're going to start in Daniel 8:1. Hey, come on in. Welcome. Daniel 1. Who can read Daniel 1 through 4 for me? Who's got it ready? Anybody? Or you can just read from the screen. Mickey, you want to read it for me?
Sure, 1 through 4?
Yep.
Third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the citadel, which is the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward, and northward, and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could run from his power. He did as he pleased, and became great.
All right. So I'm going to tax your memories because it's been more than a month since we last met when we discussed Daniel chapter 7. But as I said before, and sometimes if you don't understand the basic flow of ancient history, meaning the world empires, especially the ones in the Middle East, you're not going to be able to understand biblical prophecy very well, especially these in Daniel. But if you recall, we've talked about King Belshazzar in chapter 5 and chapter 7. In the first verse, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, that he was a king that for many years secular scholars denied existed, and they mocked the Bible for claiming that he did because there was no record of him. Now, of course, they've eaten crow and said, okay, we did find records, we know he does exist. Okay. The reason that he wasn't known before is because he was a co-regent with his father, who was in exile or just in his son was basically ruling in his place for the most part. But if you remember in chapter 7 of Daniel, at the very beginning, sorry, it wasn't on the right verse here. It says, in the 1st year of Belshazzar, I had this vision. So this vision, chapter 7, was of the 4 beasts, right? You had the lion with the wing, you had the bear with one leg lifted up higher than the other, right? And then you had the 4th beast, the 3rd one was a leopard, right? With 4 wings. And then you had the 4th beast, which was terrible and exceedingly strong and different from all others before it, okay? So that vision was given to Daniel in the 1st year of Belshazzar, who was only a king for a short time before the Persian Empire overtook him, right? So these visions were coming to before Persia conquered Babylon. The first, the statue vision or dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2 was much, much earlier. That was several decades earlier, when Belshazzar's grandfather or great-grandfather, historians aren't exactly sure which, had that vision. And that also showed a succession of 4 empires. So this one is coming 2 years after chapter 7. So basically what this means, and you see him referencing that one in verse 1, after the one that appeared to me the first time. He's talking about chapter 7, the vision of chapter 7, okay? So that means that he must not have had significant visions like this in between. The reason these were recorded in successive chapters is because these were very momentous for him. God may have communicated to him through other dreams and visions that were lesser during that time that just aren't recorded, but these 2 were the most significant to him, so he's recorded them. It says, I saw in the vision, and it so happened while I was looking that I was in Shushan, or your version may say Susa, it's the same place, in Persia. So I'm going to show you this map here. You see this area here that says Elam, okay? Anytime you read a prophecy, you read in the Old Testament, you see prophecy against Elam, it's referring to that nation. It's pretty much, synonymous with Persia, okay? If you really want to split hairs, they're different peoples. You can see this map has the Persians actually over here. But if you're reading the Old Testament and they have a prophecy against Elam, and you want to know which people group that's referring to today, it's Iran. And actually, if you know phonetics, linguistics, Elam and Iran are linguistically very close. R's and L's can be interchanged, and M's and N's can be interchanged. Okay, so in the Old Testament, when we read prophecy against Elam, that is an Old Testament prophet that'll apply to the nation of Iran today. Okay. Anyways, Daniel is in Elam, and you can see northwest side of it, a city labeled Susa. So that's where Daniel was, and Susa is one of the main cities, the primary royal city of the Persian Empire. Okay, but at this time, Belshazzar is still king, which means Babylon is in control of Susa at this time. Everybody follow me? After the Persians conquer Babylon, Susa becomes one of their primary cities. And if I recall correctly, that's the book of Esther takes place in Susa as well. Now, if you can look here, this is a close-up of Susa, and this river, some of your versions may say the Ulai River, others will say the Ulai Canal. You see this map here where there's the Shuar River is going to the left of the city, and the Ulai Canal is labeled there. Now, that is conjecture. I think Bible historians believe that is accurate, that was a canal that was being called Ulai, but others have speculated that it was actually a different little river. Don't know that it really matters. But Daniel would have been probably up there either on the Acropolis or the royal city, because the citadel means fortress. Okay, there was a fortress area where the soldiers were being housed and other important officials. Any questions about any of that? No? Also notice he says vision, not dream. Okay, there's a difference. So visions come to believers when they're in prayer. Okay, it's usually you're just, maybe you have your eyes closed, but you're not asleep. And if you open your eyes, the vision will still go on. Okay. I've had a few brief visions of things every now and then, but I've never had anything like this. I've had, I think, prophetic dreams, but I've never had a vision like this. So he looks up and he sees what? He sees a ram. Okay? He sees a ram. And a ram is a male sheep. Okay? It has 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high. One was higher than the other. So we have not seen, there was no ram in chapter 7, but chapter 7 teaches us that God is representing nations or peoples or empires with animals. Okay? So based on that, we're already understanding this is some kind of empire. This is one of the nations. So which one do you think it is? Does this make you think of any of the animals in the previous chapter? Medo-Persians, exactly. Okay, why? Because if we go back to the description in Daniel 7 of the second beast, 7:5, it says, suddenly another beast, a second, like her, it was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said, thus to it arise, devour much flesh. So it was, a bear was raised up, and one leg is higher than the other. Okay, so this is the same thing, and you don't have to take my word for it. Later in the chapter, the angel Gabriel is going to tell Daniel very clearly the ram is Medo-Persia. Okay, so this isn't a doubtful interpretation. But it's interesting that God just chosen one to represent it with a bear, and now he's representing it with a ram. Okay, that's interesting, and I have a speculation as to why that is, but I'm not going to go into that tonight because it would take a whole class on its own. But I do note, if you remember, when we talked about in chapter 6, Darius the Mede, chapter 5. It says Darius the Mede was the head of the armies, for the Medo-Persian armies that conquer Babylon, right? And we talked about how I mentioned that modern scholars don't believe Darius the Mede existed. They say, like Belshazzar, they say he didn't exist. Well, they just don't have any records of him. But it's clear from the text that he's an older man, not a young man, in the passage. And I speculated, because we have no historical documents from the Median Empire, but we have a lot from the Persian Empire, that actually Darius was probably the grandfather of the 2 royal families. The 2 royal families were intermarrying. We know that's true. And that over time, so Darius was eclipsed because the Persians wanted to take credit for everything, and they eventually became the stronger one. And so Darius the Mede has been forgotten, but the very next king of Persia was called Darius, and I believe that was after his grandfather, Darius the Mede. So this verse in chapter 8 would support that, because it says one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last, okay, which indicates that the higher one started off as lower, and then it came up, and then it surpassed the first one. Since Media and Persia, 2 empires united through royal marriage, then the first one would be Media, because Persia is the one that became dominant, and to this day, sometimes we say Medo-Persia, but most of the time we just say Persia, right? All right, so here's the key, though. Since Daniel is in the 3rd year of Belshazzar, this is before that he's received his vision, before the hand appeared and started writing on the wall. Y'all remember that story? Because that hand happened, that vision of the hand that all of Belshazzar's court had, that was the very night that Persia came. So in this vision, Daniel is being shown the future about what's about to happen, because Persia is going to be conquering Babylon very soon. All right, so he's being shown ahead of time. So he didn't go into that moment where they're reporting to him this hand was writing on the wall. He's not going into that with no knowledge at all. God has spoken things to him and revealed stuff to him. He saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward, so that no animal could withstand him. Okay. These other animals would be other nations, other people groups, smaller ones, and just saying the Medo-Persians are dominating. They're pushing northward up into Central Asia. They're pushing west out towards Greece, etc., and Turkey, and they're pushing southward in Arabia and Israel, etc., and even to Egypt. And that is exactly what Persia did. So if we had a video recording of Daniel talking about this time-stamped to the actual year that this happened, then you could prove, okay, he was shown this and a few years later. So if they had YouTube back then, we could prove that prophecy had been fulfilled. Because they didn't have that kind of thing back there, then what scholars do today is they just assume that this was written afterwards. That since there's no way Daniel could have predicted the future, that someone faked Daniel's name, pretended he wrote it, but wrote it after all these events happened. Okay? So the older and older copies of Daniel we find will prove that that hypothesis is false. We know as believers that he did write it, and he did write it when he said he did. Okay? There's really no reason to doubt that, other than you just don't want to believe someone can predict the future if God reveals it, or that God would reveal the future to somebody. Okay, so that is all about Persia, and that basically represents the Persian Empire expanding. Okay, now can somebody else read for me, please, 5 through 7?
Long
Yep.
one is Persia,
Yep.
and the shorter one is
Media.
what?
Media.
Media.
Media. When you combine those two names, people say it Medo-Persian, but the nation itself is called Media. And we don't really talk about them. They kind of been lost to history. Persians dominated them, but at the beginning they were the prominent ones, and then Persia overtook them. But they were in an alliance. It was their alliance that actually did all the conquering. Okay. All right. Who can read 5 through 7 for me?
I can read.
Okay.
And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west, across the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and had a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. And I saw him confronting the ram, who was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram and broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So we have a goat, which just what's striking to me is that a ram is a male sheep, which is often equated with God's people, but the goat is equated with people that are not of God, pagans. That's just an interesting detail. I don't know if we have time to really go into, but the goat has a notable horn, so it's like a unicorn goat. We got a huge horn. What do horns represent again on these animals? What does it represent? No, the goat itself is the country.
Nation?
No.
I'm thinking more power or strength, but.
A horn is a symbol for power, for the power of the nation, but in these prophetic passages, what do the horns represent specifically?
The leader?
Yes, the leader, the king, the king of that country or empire. Okay, so what this is, the goat is a different empire with one very powerful leader. Okay, he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which means 2 powerful leaders, which would have been the king of Media, the king of Persia. Okay, and the goat ram with furious power. He saw him confront the ram, moved with rage, attacked the ram, broke 2 horns. Okay, so basically ended the reign of those 2 kings. So it means he conquered both Media and Persia. Now first let's note how much time is passing in these few verses. Is this 1 week to the next week? So Daniel's seeing in a vision that's happening very fast. But when we study world history, we know that the Persian Empire lasted for quite a while. Okay, and actually we're going to find out that this goat is the Grecian Empire, the Greek Empire, and the main horn is specifically Alexander the Great. Okay, that's who it's representing. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. That is who conquered the Persian Empire, was Alexander the Great. So this vision of the ram ending and then being conquered by the goat, that's taking easily at least 200 years, if not more. So that's a significant amount of time, right? And then, sorry, let me get rid of that. And this is going to be confirmed in the same passage. Gabriel is going to explain to Daniel, this is Greece. Okay, so again, we're not really. All right, who can read for me 8 through 12?
Therefore the male goat grew very, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it 4 notable ones came up towards the 4 winds of heaven.
Okay, so let's stop right there for a second. Therefore the male goat grew very great. This means the Greek Empire grew very large, and it did. Okay, in fact, this is the extent of Alexander's empire. Okay, you see how large that is? He controlled not only, and I believe the red line is his, that's representing his route of conquest. Okay, so he not only took all of Turkey, all the way down through Israel, he conquered Egypt, he went back up over all of Iraq, all of Iran, and even over here into what we would call Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc. So he controlled a lot of land. That's pretty good. Okay, and historians know that Alexander the Great did this conquest through speed. Okay, he basically went so fast that the enemies just didn't have time to prepare or defend. And really, the only ones that he had to work hard to conquer were the Persians themselves, because the rest of the empire, this was all except for Greece, all of it previously was controlled by, okay, for the most part. And they just had small garrisons of soldiers left in different places. They hadn't really expected Alexander the Great. So his speed allowed him to conquer all these garrisons, take these territories, receive soldiers. His army grew and grew and grew. Okay, so then by the time he got to Persia, they were just overwhelmed. And once he defeated them, there was nobody left to withstand him. And he did die in his strength. You notice the verse says, when he became strong, the large horn was broken. Alexander the Great was known for being a partier. He loved to get drunk. He loved to do all kinds of things. He had homosexual acts with lots of young men and women too, as far as I understand it. That was kind of the way of the pagan Greeks back then. And it's not sure what he died of, but he died in the field, okay, on this route after he'd just finished his conquest. Some tried to make it romantic and say that he'd kind of died of a broken heart because he had nothing left to conquer. But in reality, he died of kind of overdose or an aneurysm or an STD. It's not really clear exactly. It's a long, long time ago. So all we know is that, and it could even be that one of his men poisoned him. That's also been speculated, is that he was poisoned because rumor is that one of the generals poisoned him because he wanted to continue conquering. Like, he wanted to go even further away from Greece. And his men were tired, and they were like, we don't want to go anymore. We want to go home. Let's kill him and be done with this. So actually may be the most feasible, right? And I'm going to read you a story here about him. This comes from Josephus. Josephus was a Jewish historian. He wrote during the time of the Roman Empire. His prime was about the time Jerusalem was being conquered by Rome. So 40 years after is when Josephus was writing. But he is like one of the best ancient historians we have that tells us a lot of things about the ancient world that we don't know from the Bible. And there are other ancient historians. Their works are in fragment, like we don't have really complete works a lot of times, or the works have been lost. We've only got others who are like commenting on what they'd written and things like that. But Josephus, we have a lot of information from. So when he's talking Alexander the Great, this was what he says. He says, now Alexander, when he had taken Gaza, so yes, people were fighting over Gaza even back then. When he had taken Gaza, made haste to go up to Jerusalem. And Jaddus, the high priest, when he heard that, was in agony and under terror, and knowing how he should meet the Macedonians. So this was in the around 320 something BC, roughly, okay? Since the king was displeased at his foregoing disobedience, because Alexander had sent a message and told Jaddus he wanted soldiers to go help him fight the Persians, and Jerusalem's leadership had said, no, we can't do that. Alexander was coming to destroy all of the Jews in Jerusalem. Therefore ordained that the people, the high priest did, should make supplications to God and should join with him in offering sacrifice to God, sought to protect that nation and to deliver them from the perils that were coming upon them. So Jaddus, his response wasn't to gather an army or call soldiers and try to fight Alexander to defend themselves. It was to tell them and pray. Okay, we need help. We need God. Whereupon God warned him, the high priest, in a dream, which, notice again how God uses dreams, which came upon him after he had offered sacrifice. He should take courage and adorn the city. Adorn the city means decorate the city like for a party. And open the gates. So don't close the city up like you're under siege. Go ahead and open it up for Alexander to come in with no resistance and put decorations everywhere like you're having a party. And that the rest, all the people, appear in white garments, but that he and the priest should meet the king in the habits proper to the order. So that means he and the priest, the high priest and the other priests, are supposed to be dressed in full priest vestments, their robes, okay? Making it clear who they are, without the dread of any ill consequences which the providence of God would prevent. So he's basically saying, God told Jadis, city, decorate it like you're happy and having a party. Everybody get dressed in your best clothes and you guys wear your full priestly vestments and go out to meet Alexander. Upon which, when he arose from his sleep, he greatly rejoiced to all the warning he had received from God, according to which dream he acted entirely, and so waited for the coming of the king. Now, when Jadis understood that Alexander was not far from the city, he went out in procession, a parade. They basically went out in parade, with the priests and the multitude of the citizens. The procession was venerable, and the manner of it different from that of other nations. It reached a place called Sapha, which name translated into Greek signifies prospect, for you have thence a prospect both of Jerusalem and of the temple. So it's like, means you had a good view of Jerusalem from the city. And when the Phoenicians and the Samaritans that followed him thought they should have liberty to plunder the city, Jerusalem, and torment the high priest to death, which the king's displeasure fairly promised them, the very reverse of it happened. For Alexander, when he saw the multitude at a distance, in white, while the priest stood clothed with fine linen, and the high priest in purple and scarlet clothing, with his mitre on his head, having the golden plate, whereupon the name of God, Yahweh, was engraved. If you know Leviticus, you know in Exodus, you know the high priest's outfit. He approached by himself. So Alexander left all of his troops behind. He saw all the people in white. He saw the high priest in his full high priest outfit. Alexander spurred his horse and took off to go meet them alone. Okay. He adored that name, meaning he worshipped Yahweh. He worshipped the name of Yahweh upon approaching, and first saluted the high priest. The Jews also did all together with one voice salute Alexander and encompass him about, whereupon the kings of Syria and the rest were surprised at what Alexander had done, and supposed him disorderly. So all of his generals and the soldiers were thinking Alexander had gone crazy. I thought we were coming to kill these people, and you went up and you bowed down. I mean, he rode his horse alone, got off the horse, bowed down to the high priest. However, Parmenion alone went up to him and asked him how it came to pass that when all others adored him, he should adore the high priest of the Jews. To which he replied, I did not him, but that God who has honored him with his high priesthood. For I saw this very person in a dream in this very habit when I was at Dion in Macedonia, who, when I was considering with myself how I might obtain the of Asia, exhorted me to make no delay, but boldly to pass over the sea thither, for that he would conduct my army and would give me the dominion over the Persians. Okay, what he's saying is, and Josephus is indicating that he saw this high priest in a dream, but most likely he actually saw Jesus dressed in the same high priest outfit in a dream, the word of God, because the language here says he would conduct my army, and he would get this one he's seen in his dream. He would give him dominion over the Persians. Only Jesus has that authority. Okay, so this most likely was Jesus dressed in the high priest outfit, because Jesus is our high priest, right? And basically Alexander said, I saw a man in this very outfit in a dream who told me, yes, go conquer them and give you dominion over the Persians. So Jesus is the one who told Alexander to go do that, according to Alexander. And then he says, whence is that, having seen no other in that habit? Meaning, I've been all over this country, many, many different lands and countries and peoples, and I haven't seen anybody else dressed like this. Now, seeing this person in it and remembering that and the exhortation which I had in my dream, I believe that I bring this army under the divine conduct, and shall therewith conquer Darius, probably the Mede or the Persian in that case, and destroy the power of the Persians, and things will succeed according to what is in my own mind. So he's basically taking the appearance of the high priest from Jerusalem in the same outfit he saw in his vision as confirmation that God himself has ordained him to conquer the Persians. So after this, he's going to go to Persia without fear. Okay. And when he had said this to Parmenion and had given the high priest his right hand, the priest ran along by him, and he came into the city. And when he went up into the temple, he offered sacrifice to God to the high priest's direction, which means Alexander wasn't the one actually sacrificing the animal, he brought the animal and the high priest did it. Okay. And magnificently treated both the high priest and the priests. And when the book of Daniel was shown him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that himself was the person intended. And he was then glad he dismissed the multitude for the present. Okay. So, according to Josephus, Alexander the Great was shown this chapter we're reading. And he looked at it and said, oh, I'm that big horn. I'm going to go do it. Okay? Isn't that crazy? It doesn't mean Alexander the Great was, or necessarily that we'll meet him in heaven. That's unclear and probably doubtful. But nevertheless, that's God's decision and role. And then from there, you can read on. Basically, the result of this is that Alexander gave the Jews a special rights in all the Grecian Empire, where they didn't have to supply soldiers if they didn't want to. They had minimal taxes. There was a lot of things he wasn't going to tax. He was going to let them worship if they saw fit, giving them a lot of privileges. Okay. Any questions about that?
That's pretty cool.
Isn't it amazing?
Maybe they didn't roll the scroll far enough to let him see where the horn was broken.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know what he would have thought about that. I mean, I don't know. That is interesting because he would have seen that part too.
Unless they kept it rolled up, you know?
Well, he didn't speak Hebrew,
Sure.
right? So I wonder if they didn't read him that part. I mean, that would have been very wise, you know. Let's just read him the part where he conquers it. Don't read him that line. No. Skip verse 8. Maybe. Okay, so continue verse 8. Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. So again, 1 replaced by 4. And we'll go back and note here, let's see. Notice, one thing I mentioned, I forgot to notice, verse 5. And as I was considering, suddenly it came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground.
That's interesting.
That is a symbol of speed. I'm talking about. He was going so fast, he's just like flying. Okay. And we go, and that's actually historically true. That's what Alexander did. Go back to Daniel 7. We look at the third beast described in verse of chapter 7. And the third beast in chapter 7, which is also representing Greece, and this, it's not a goat, it's a leopard. How fast are leopards? They're fast, okay? And there was an Anatolian leopard that was or an Anatolian tiger, was also like a leopard. This could have been referring to. But in verse chapter 7, 6, it says, after this I looked, there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. Again, flying, right? Same connection. And so 1 and 4. So what is that referencing? Okay. What is the 4 about? Well, when Alexander died, as he was dying, they asked him who should inherit, because he knew he was dying. They all knew it. They said, who should inherit your empire? Who are you going to lead your empire to? He had 4 major generals that were like his best friends and were very capable, and it was because of them that he'd been able to move so quickly and do such an amazing conquest, right? And that's why in Daniel 7, the leopard has 4 wings, because those generals helped him. Does that make sense? So now he's dying, and they were very concerned. What's going to happen now? He didn't have a, of age to take over. I think he did, if I remember right, he did have a baby that was back in Macedonia that would have to, have a regent care for him until he was 18. or considered to be an adult. But these generals are asking, who's going to take this empire now that you're dying, Alexander? And according to the legend, what he said is, to the strongest. Which then created a bunch of wars. Okay? So, now, some scholars think that what he actually said, the Greek word for strongest, is very, very close to the name of one of his generals. So some are thinking he was dying, he said the name of one of his generals, that was his favorite, and the others reinterpreted it as, no, he said to the strongest. And so regardless, what happened is a long series, a bunch of wars that really, about 20 years, they were just kind of trying to settle everything between each other, who lead this thing. They divided Alexander's empire up into 4, and I think, yes, so this is the original division. After he died, you see there's actually 5 here. Ptolemy, if you've heard Ptolemy, I can't even pronounce it, Ptolemaic, or Ptolemy the First took over Egypt and that southern end of the empire. You had Seleucus, which is the founder of the Seleucid Empire. That, if you read history books. Over here at the Persian area, you had a guy named Antigonus who took over Turkey. Cassander and Lysimachus were up there dividing up the area in Greece. Okay, but soon after this, Antigonus, who had Turkey, basically got wiped out by Seleucus. So this was the map by 300 BC. So you notice how many kingdoms? There's 4. Okay, exactly as was prophesied by Daniel in this vision, or by God in the vision to Daniel. But if this is the story of this is to be considered accurate history, then it's definitely was predicted far in advance. Everybody follow me? And to the exact detail. The two are not really going to remain important, other than note that one of them may have become very connected to Rome, but the main 2, Ptolemy and Seleucus, these are to be in constant battle back and forth over the next 200 years, especially over the land of Israel. And there's an entire chapter we're going to get to in a few weeks, Daniel 11, that is all the wars between them. Okay.
I think it's interesting that there were 4 leaders and they divided up. The division clearly was not equal.
Right. Right. But if you think about it this way, the part in yellow looks very large, but it was also much more primitive than Greece and Egypt that had a lot more civilization and populous cities and business going on. So if you're talking about like quote, GDP and civilization, the division is probably more equitable than it looks from geography.
Well, when they said the strongest.
Yeah. Sure.
They still haven't figured
Well,
it out.
originally Antigonus thought he was getting all of Turkey, and Seleucus put an end to that. He basically took it away from him. Okay, so let's get back to Daniel 8 and read. And when it says 4 notable ones came up toward the 4 winds of heaven, that means in all directions. Okay. Verse 9. Who was reading that?
Me.
All right.
And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, toward the east, and towards the glorious land. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground, and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered.
Go ahead. Read to 15.
Then I heard a holy one speaking,
14.
and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, How long will the vision be concerning concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed.
Okay, thank you. So, this is where a little bit of debate's going to come in as far as interpretation of what people think this is referring to. But I'm going to read through this a little slower, and we're going to point out a few things and try to remember those details. It says, out of one of what?
Horn.
The four
I mean,
horns.
those.
Yeah. So it doesn't mean out of one of the four kings. It means one of the four kingdoms. So look back at right here. So it means that one horn is going to come up from one of these four kingdoms. Okay? It's a little horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. Now, if we recall, in chapter 7, didn't we also have a little horn come up among the 10 horns of that beast? Right? We don't see 10 horns here, but the first question we have to ask ourselves, we're going to read the passage carefully and decide if it's the same little horn that was mentioned in chapter 7, or is it a different one? Okay. God is very consistent, but he's also very capable of being confusing. He likes to make us work, okay, because it makes us pursue him better. But if, regardless, but we have seen some other parallels between the two chapters already. We had the ram with two horns, one bigger than the other, and the bear with two legs, one bigger than the other, or two sides, one higher than the other. We saw the four horns coming out of one here, and we saw four wings on the leopard, and the leopard's fast, and this goat's fast. So we see those. So that right there is evidence that this little horn being mentioned here is probably connected to the little horn of Daniel 7. Okay, and if so, as we said last week, there isn't much doubt that the little horn of chapter 7 is the Antichrist. Okay, we know that for a lot of reasons. The one we would call the Antichrist, I think the best name for him is the little horn of Daniel. Okay, but in Daniel 7, that little horn is coming up on the fourth beast, which is terrible, and unlike any beast before, it has 10 horns, and we see that pictured in the book of Revelation as well. Right? You have the seven-headed coming up in Revelation 13 that has 10 horns on it. Is a beast that is represented the Antichrist empire. We don't really have much doubt about that. Everybody follow me so far? So we have, in chapter 7, there's also language to review since it has been a month. Let me go back and look. You see here in verses 9 and 10, we saw a ceremony where God the Father on a throne, and the Son of Man is given authority. He approaches the Ancient of Days and sits next to him. And then we see the little horn speaking pompous words in chapter 7. He watched until the beast, this terrible beast, was destroyed. Okay. And then we see, in watching in the night visions, behold, one like the Son of Man, Jesus, coming with the cloud of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him, the Father. Then to him, Jesus, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people which should serve him, Jesus, his dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Okay, and we skip down to 17, and it's being explained to Daniel, these great beasts, which are four kings which arise out of the earth. And king we saw is sometimes interchangeable with kingdom. So kingdoms is what we should probably read there. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and even forever. Verse 19, then I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast, which is different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its nail of bronze, which devoured broken pieces of the residue with its feet, and the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up before, which 3 fell, spoke pompous words. I'm skipping a little bit here. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the same, prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High. and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Okay, and then anyways, we go through further, rather rehashing the whole thing, but basically, if you read the chapter, you get the clear understanding that this horn is ruling at the very end, right before Jesus returns and establishes his millennial kingdom, because his millennial kingdom is when the saints are actually going to rule, okay, and being given this kingdom. So for that reason, everyone understands this little horn is what most of us would call the Antichrist. So now we go to chapter 8. We're asking ourselves, is this little horn the same little horn, or is it a different little horn? Okay, what is this little horn doing? Well, he's growing exceedingly great toward the south. Okay, so right there, this is helping us identify. If I go back here, well, let me look at the other qualifications. The south, the east, and towards a glorious land. Okay? So, where was the picture? Sorry. If it's coming up from one of these places, then it automatically cannot be the Ptolemies that are over Egypt, unless we think that this is, he's going to be conquering down in Africa. And that doesn't really make sense, because the Bible is Israeli centered. It's centered around God's people. Like, the reason Daniel's been given this vision is because it's his people. And when he says the glorious land, he's referring to the land of Israel. Okay, so most likely it's referring to the purple or the yellow. Okay, could be the pink as well. But if this is the Antichrist little horn, notice what city peninsula is not in these empires. Roman Empire, Rome is not in this. You know, this has been a misteaching for a long time in the American church. Rome is somehow connected to the Antichrist Empire, and it's not. The reason they've done it is because we have the statue of Daniel 2 that had the four metals. You had the gold, the silver, the bronze, and the legs of iron, right, with the feet of clay. 10 toes, which is connected to 10 horns. But we talked about last week how there's no break. Like, the Roman Empire ended, and Jesus hasn't come back yet. So we explained is, if you look at Daniel 7 with the beasts, you have the lion, you have the bear, the leopard, and then you have the terrible beast. Okay, which is unlike all empires before it. It says very different. Tramples everything, destroys everything. Very rough and crude to these other empires. And so a simplistic view of this has always been, people say, well, 4 metals, 4 beasts. We got Babylon, we have Persia, Greece, and Rome. Rome was number 4. And then they say, so Rome must have really trampled everybody down and destroyed everybody. But Rome doesn't match that description. Rome was not very different from Greece. They both had Greek as the international language. They worshiped the same gods and culture, just different names for their gods. The Romans didn't trample down everything and destroy everything. They brought Pax Romana, which means Roman peace. When they came to a place, they won, and they're going to attack you if you don't if you don't want to be submitted to the taxation program. But once you're conquered, just pay your taxes, and as long as you're not talking about rebelling against us, everybody's doing their life. Okay, so Islam is the actual 4th beast, terrible beast that's different from all others before it. So then, where is Rome pictured? Well, we still call things today Greco-Roman. So in Daniel's context, there's no difference between Greece and Rome. Okay, God is portraying Greece and Rome as one. Okay, and that's why. And this Daniel 8, again, I think we're going to see. There's debate as to who this horn is, so we're going to have to solve that. But if the little horn of chapter 8 is also the Antichrist, it's also the same horn as Daniel 7, then the Antichrist definitely does not come from Rome. And Revelation also tells us he does not come from Rome. Okay? Which we've also talked about in the Revelation class. If it's the Antichrist is what's being portrayed, Rome is not in these territories. Y'all follow me? Okay. But if we view the fourth beast as Islam, then now Islam matches all three passages. It matches the iron legs of the statue of Daniel 2. It matches the fourth beast of Daniel 7. And it can also come out of Turkey. You guys follow me? And be Islamic. An Islamic leader. And fulfill them all. And it also matches with Revelation 13 with the 7 heads. And those 7 heads representing the 7 empires that have ruled over Israel. That's the complete world empire. Egypt was the first, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and that one is indicating Rome, and then Islam is the 7th and final empire. I know that was a lot. Did everybody follow that? In different ways.
Well, didn't you tell us in the Revelation class that you're gonna come from Turkey?
Yes, that's what I believe, and I believe that's what Scripture is telling us, and I believe that's the only solution that matches all of prophecy. A lot of these other theories, people will come up with a theory about something. So, like for example, people have come up with a way that you can take the King of England's name with the right titles and do English gematria and add up the 666. And so they say, okay, Charles is the Antichrist. Okay, you have to do the same thing with the Pope. They say, okay, well, he had this symbol on his hat, so he's the Antichrist. Okay, no, you have to take all of the prophecies about the Antichrist and his king and have it all match with whatever your candidate is. And the candidate that I see after many years of study, and many, I'm not the only one, lots of people are understanding today, lots of scholars are really understanding, no, it's not from Rome. It's an Islamic leader from Turkey, will be the little horn of Daniel. But we still have to actually prove that this little horn is the same one as 7. Okay, so let's finish examining this. Verse 9, little horn grew exceedingly great. Verse 10, it grew up to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Okay, so this is symbolically referring to God's people. Okay, his probably the Israeli army and or other armies that are made of descendants of Israel, because there's tribes out there, right, that we don't talk about a lot, and just the saints in general. We're going to see that language repeated later.
The stars represent saints.
Yes, in this case, yes.
It's like a reference to Revelation, when
12.
St. John is seeing, the
Yeah.
vision of the angels being cast down with Satan.
I would.
and stars.
That's kind of my impression too, is it could be connected to that. The only reason I think we're going to see language in the rest of the chapter that indicates that this is symbolically referring to actual God's people rather than angels. The reason is Revelation 12 is probably most likely referring to angels entering earth, right? And this one says the Antichrist casts these down himself, not. And so the physical Antichrist is not going to be able to conquer. He's going to be overcoming the saints, but not God's angels. And in Revelation chapter 2 are fallen angels coming down. This is the little horn attacking God's host. Okay, so it would, I'm probably land on it being a symbol of people being represented by stars this time. But other places, those are representing angels. Okay. Verse 11, he even exalted himself as the prince of the host army, God's armies. So who is the prince of the host? That would be the commander of the army of the Lord, which is none other than Jesus Christ himself. Okay, so he's exalted himself as high as Jesus. And by him, the key. This is where the debate comes in. By him, the daily sacrifices were taken away. What sacrifices are they referring to?
In the temple, wouldn't it be?
The Jewish sacrifices in God's temple. These aren't going to be referring to pagan sacrifices, in Greece or Rome or someplace like that, because this again is Israel-centric, Jewish-centric. So this little horn is going to stop the daily sacrifices, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, and that's kind of a cryptic phrase. Verse 12, because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth to the ground. He did all this and prospered. And now we're going to get into the time, but here's where the debate comes in. So we know that this previous passage has been connected to Greece, like the goat is from Greece. There was a king of we go back here to the Seleucid Empire, okay, this area in yellow. Their worst king was named Antiochus IV. Has anybody heard of Antiochus IV? Antiochus Epiphanes, yes. Yep. Anybody heard of him? Yes? No? So he was the Jews around 167 BC, and he entered the Jewish temple and he stopped the sacrifices. Okay, and he did a lot more terrible things than that. Okay, so what happened is he came into or he was in the area of Jerusalem, and there was a high priest who wasn't necessarily a godly man. He basically was in the position for power. And one of his relatives went to Antiochus Epiphanes and bribed him and said, hey, I'm going to pay you a lot of money. Will you make me high priest in Jerusalem? Because the Seleucid Empire was controlling Israel at that time. And he said, sure. So he ripped out the other corrupt high priest and put his guy in. Then he went down to Egypt and to fight down in Egypt, Antiochus Epiphanes did. And the former high priest in Jerusalem heard a rumor that Epiphanes had been killed. So he raised up an army of 1,000 men and went back and retook Jerusalem in order to install himself as high priest again. So when Antiochus Epiphanes came up from Egypt, he was aged, and he went into, he came into the land of Israel, reconquered it. Josephus says that 80,000 Jews were lost, that 40,000 and 40,000 were shipped off into slavery, okay, around the Seleucid Empire. He went into the temple and he sacrificed, he removed about Yahweh, he turned off the lampstand, he turned off he made the light, which was a major problem for, offense to the Jews. He sacrificed a pig inside God's temple. He put statues of Zeus up in the temple and rededicated to Zeus. He sprinkled pig's blood around the temple. He boiled the pig's flesh in some water and sprinkled that on the Jewish holy books that they had. And then he made the high priest and all the other priests eat pig. Okay? And on and on. So he was an antichrist. He was an antichrist. He sacrifices, and that lasted until 164 BC. Okay, roughly. There was a family that are referred to as the Maccabees, and if you read what Protestants we call the Apocrypha, Deuterocanonical. Yes, I knew Grant would say Deuterocanonical. That's fine. They're actually very valuable reading, and we could debate whether they're scripture, but they're definitely worth reading and have a lot of good information. You read Maccabees especially, and what you see is there was a man by the name of Mattathias, or Matthew is how we would put it in English, Maccabee, and after Antiochus Epiphanes, he established a program where he was going to force all Jews to become pagan. He was going to convert them to Hellenistic culture, make them all sacrifice to pagan gods, and he sent emissaries out to the smaller Jewish villages to force them to offer sacrifices to these pagan gods. And in this one village, that was a very pious village where the Maccabee family lived, Matthew, the father of the family, was viewed as a very strong leader, and he was refusing to do it, and no one else in the village would, and his family would not. And so the emissary from Antiochus was very angry, and then one village finally broke ranks and went forward to offer a sacrifice on the pagan altar. I don't remember if it was to Zeus or who it was to. Matthew, or Mattathias Maccabee, was so enraged that he rushed forward and he killed the villager that was going to offer this pagan sacrifice, and he also killed the emissary from the Grecian army. Okay, and after that he raised up, and because he was outraged that they would tell them to worship anyone but Yahweh, and he got followers. He was killed pretty quick, but his sons took over, and they succeeded. They actually kicked the Greeks out permanently. The only way the Romans came into the scene was slowly over time through kind of some weird political machinations. The Romans actually didn't conquer Israel. They were coming in through treaties and protection agreements, and then eventually decided, yeah, we have the rule you. And then that's when the descendants of the Maccabees and others said, no, you don't. That's when they punched him and said, yeah, we're here. So, but there was a good period of time, not quite 100 years, that the Maccabees freed Israel from the rule of the Greeks after this happened. Okay, so that's the story. So many scholars look at this and they see all the other verses have been fulfilled, were fulfilled in the ancient history before the time of Jesus. And they see this where it says, and out of one of them came a little horn, and Antiochus Epiphanes did come out of the Seleucid Empire. And he did stop the sacrifices, right? In verse 11 here, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away. Now, we don't really have record, I mean, he did some heinous things. Record of him calling himself Messiah necessarily, or elevating that high. But the second phrase, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, is cryptic as to what did that mean. Was the prince's throne, his visible rulership over the temple of God in Jerusalem taken out, or was this mean the temple itself is going to be destroyed? Okay, you could argue maybe not, but regardless, you're starting to. Antiochus Epiphanes definitely did not destroy the temple. Okay, if that's what it means. And if you just want to argue, well, he kind of cast down the authority of the Messiah, figuratively speaking, by putting Zeus in there and doing all this stuff. Okay, you could argue that, maybe. But then, because of transgression, an army was given over to horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. And he cast truth down to the ground, and he did all this and prospered. So again, he cast truth down to the ground, and Epiphanes didn't really have a anti-truth campaign other than to try to Hellenize things, but still maybe you could argue that's an interpretation. But the beginning of verse 12 is a problem, because he says because of transgression an army was given, meaning this little horn is given an army by God because of the transgression of God's people. It's saying that God's people in this moment are sinful, and so God is allowing them to be by the little horn because of sin. Y'all follow? And that's why the daily sacrifices are stopped, because of this sin among the people. And then the last part says he did all this effort. And these are the things that really don't match Antiochus Epiphanes, because the people actually weren't that sinful. They were pretty resistant, which is why so many of them were killed by Antiochus. And the Maccabees were successful only because the people were so pious. In other words, the generation of the Maccabees were not a sinful generation. And Antiochus Epiphanes did not prosper. Thank you. He did not prosper. He died pretty shortly after that. Okay, he was his army was defeated within a few years of this, and then he died. So he didn't prosper.
So having said all that,
Yep.
you're saying that little horn is the same little horn?
That all of those details, none of those details match Antiochus Epiphanes. He can be a foreshadowing. He's a foreshadowing of the one to come, but he's not. The other details don't match. And I'm going to skip forward just a little bit to give you the final clincher here. Because in verse 17, Gabriel tells him, understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end. Okay? And that right there clinches it.
Yep.
We didn't actually have to do all that discussion, but I know that what people say. I know scholars say this was Antiochus Epiphanes, so we needed to walk through the details, know the history, so you could see why it's not. Okay? But let's go back up here. It says, then I heard a holy one speak, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, and of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Okay? Now, some versions will say for 2,300 days and nights, or nights and days, okay? Or evenings and mornings, which is a figure of speech. It just means a day, okay? But I'm pointing that out for a reason. So, but who are these holy ones? It's unclear. The Hebrew word is kadosh, which means just a holy one. It's the same word that's used for saint in other chapters of Daniel, okay, which is referring to God's people. So it could be referring to some angels, 2 angels, or it's referring to 2 of God's people talking, okay. The image here, if you see, then I heard a holy one speak. It's like he's having this vision, like maybe in his peripheral, he's hearing somebody talking, okay. He's hearing somebody talking about something like da 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 da, and another saint or is then making a very clear question in the middle of this talking. It says, how long will this vision be concerning the daily sacrifice? So how long are the sacrifices going to be stopped? How long are the sacrifices going to be? And the answer given is 2,300 days. Then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Now, this has been a mystery that nobody has solved since Daniel wrote it. What is he referring to? 2,300 days. What is the beginning of this 2,300 days? And are these days or are these years? Because we have other Daniel that are equating 1 day to 1 year, right? So let's just hold that, and then let's keep reading. And we'll come back and analyze that time later, okay? So who can read for me 15 through 17?
Then it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and the meaning that suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of
Ulai.
Ulai, who called and said, Gabriel, make this understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, Son of Man, that the vision refers to the time of the end.
Okay, so he has just heard random holy ones talking. That's all it says is random holy ones. It doesn't say random, but just random. But here is that it happened when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and was seeking the meaning, and suddenly there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. So this is standing out to him as different, I guess, from the holy ones. So that would indicate that they may have been angels. But he's saying this guy had the appearance of a man. And that's noteworthy. You might just read over that, skim over it, not really pay attention to it, but it's pretty significant. It was a significant enough detail that he's saying he looked like a man. Okay? He's standing where? He said, I heard a man's voice. He's standing, I guess, in the river or in the canal, in the water, which symbolically he's standing in the power of God. But the man is commanding Gabriel.
Jesus.
This is most likely Jesus. Okay. He is commanding, the form of a man, son of man. He's commanding Gabriel. And he says, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So Gabriel came near where I stood. And when he came, so the explanation is coming from Gabriel at the of Jesus. And when he came, I was afraid and fell on my face. Okay, and that's another little detail. But he said to me, understand, son of man, and that's referring to Daniel. And by the way, if you read it in the Hebrew, that should probably say son of Adam. Okay, we often don't make that connection. Understand, son of man, that the vision refers to the end. So he's telling him the time. So that means that when we look at this, that would seem to be pretty strong confirmation that the little horn coming out of either the purple or the yellow in Turkey is going to happen at the time of the end. Okay? Not before Jesus. Okay? Antiochus Epiphanes came almost 200 years before Jesus. So it is very unlikely that he would be referred to time of the end, since Jesus hadn't even come yet. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, who can read 18 through 22? Okay.
Now, as he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and stood me upright.
Okay, so I guess he fell forward on his face out of fear, and I guess he's gone into a deep sleep. They put him into he's gone into some kind of trance or deep sleep. But Gabriel touches him and stands him up. Okay, go ahead.
And he said, look, I am making known to you what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation. For at the appropriate time the end shall be.
Okay, what is the latter time of the indignation? Well, the entire world is in rebellion against God. This is the great indignation. It is about the end, the latter time of this period of rebellion. Okay, go ahead.
The ram which you saw having the two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia.
Okay, so there's no question. The ram is Media. Go ahead.
And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eye is the first king.
Okay, again, no doubt. Very clearly, the goat is Greece, and the large horn is the first king. It's Alexander the Great. Now, was Alexander the Great actually the first king of Greece? No. But he is the first king of the Grecian Empire. He's the one who created the empire. But he wasn't the first king of Macedonia. Okay? That's accurate. Yes, go ahead.
As for the broken horn and the four that stood up in its place, 4 kingdoms shall arise out of that nation, but not with its power.
Okay, again, fully fulfilled. We already talked about empires. None of them had the same power as Alexander the Great's original empire because they're just as large. None of them have the full population, none of them have the full GDP, and they're all constantly fighting each other, especially the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, okay? All right, let's go ahead and read. This is where it gets interesting. Okay,
It hasn't been interesting so far.
well, here's where we're going to get this next passage is since we've understood that this little horn here is the little horn, same as little horn of Daniel 7, this is the Antichrist, the one we call the Antichrist. We're going to get a description of him. Now, here's what's interesting is all these generations that the American church has taught that the Antichrist was going to be Roman, that he was going to come out of the Roman Empire. All of them go to these verses to talk about what the Antichrist will do. Somehow they fail to remember that the little horn came out of the Grecian Empire or the Seleucid Empire, not Rome. Okay, so ignore that. All right, but let's go ahead. Glennis, would you read 23 and 24?
Sure. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors had reached their full, a king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and he shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people.
Okay, so in the latter time of their kingdom, okay, so that's referring to all of this Western influence over this region. When the transgressors have reached their fullness, that means completion. So this is another confirmation. This is for the time of the end. Basically saying when the world reaches the fullness of its sin. Essentially, Jesus is waiting for. He's waiting for the fullness of sin, transgressors to be completed, and also for the fullness of martyrs to be completed. There's a certain number of his people that are to be martyred. And when both of those have reached the that he's established, which will be at the same moment, that's when Jesus returns. Okay? But in this sense, the transgressors reaching their fullness isn't like this. There's a period of time where the Antichrist will rule. Okay? This king shall arise, and he'll have fierce features. This means strong features. Okay? Very strong, angry kind of features. Angry may be an interpretation, so don't. Strong features is probably the most should take as absolutely what it means, but the Hebrew is a little bit cryptic. Who understands sinister schemes, okay? Who understands plots and manipulations and the kinds of things that intelligence services do, okay? And as we have in our back of our mind, President Erdogan of Turkey and his son and some of the moves we've seen them make recently, and the fact that their name does add up to 666 and they're in the right place, and they've stated that they want to revive the Islamic Empire and things like this. President Erdogan, Tayyip Erdogan, has very fierce features. He's kind of an angry looking guy, okay? And he definitely understands sinister schemes. He is the true father of the Islamic State, but nobody knows it. He runs ISIS. If this was an ISIS attack that happened in New Orleans, he approved it. Okay, but nobody's going to connect those dots or know it because the Erdogans are masters of deceit, deceptive practice. They basically, same thing, there was a coup, an attempted coup against Erdogan in 2015, I believe, 2015, 2016. And where they tried to remove him for being a dictator. And he shut the coup down in 24 hours and arrested thousands and thousands of conspirators. Well, it came out later, he organized his own coup. Like he sent intelligence throughout Turkey to especially his own army, try to raise up a coup against himself. So he knew ahead of time when it was going to happen, who was involved. And then as soon as it started, he let it start, and then he was ready with his sweep in and arrest all of the conspirators. And the whole reason he did it was to eliminate anybody who would oppose him. That's a sinister scheme. Y'all follow me?
Yep.
Not saying absolutely, but a lot of evidence. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, kind of look back at this map. Turkey is, and I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on it, Turkey is not super powerful by itself. But the first thing it could mean is that only when he starts bringing into an alliance with himself Muslim nations in this final end-time Muslim alliance will he become powerful. In other words, it's through an alliance that isn't his own power. He's aligned himself with other powers to make himself powerful. We have a clue, I think, in Revelation that says that the final beast has the of a bear, which I think means that he's going to be aided with weaponry and transport by Russia, and like they're going to provide the ships or airplanes to like overnight jumpstart his army to be massive. There's other things, like there is a American Air Force base in Turkey that has nuclear warheads in it, nuclear missiles. So if for some reason we become weak at some point, he can just go in there, kick us out, take over these, become a nuclear power overnight. Okay, so that would be becoming powerful without his own power. And you say, well, he can't control those because they've got, fail-safes and protections on them, and you have to, well, yeah, he can bring in engineers and reprogram them. That won't actually be a problem. Okay, couldn't one afternoon, but he could do it. Not too hard. Okay, he shall destroy fearfully. Erdogan does do this. He's actively attacking the Kurds. He's already doing the ISIS was the baby. He shall prosper and thrive. he shall destroy the mighty. That has not happened. The king of Turkey has not done any of this yet. In fact, if he is the guy, he's still in the very beginning phases. Okay, there's still a long way to go. And also the holy people. Who are the holy people?
Jews.
The Jews, or the Israelites. So, if the Kurds, which I believe is true, are part of the lost tribes of Israel, then Erdogan is already attacking and destroying the holy people. Okay? But I believe this is saying very clearly that, little horn is going to conquer the land of Israel. Okay, which obviously Erdogan hasn't done that. But he is calling for it. Sandra.
So when it says he shall destroy the mighty, that's Israel?
Well, no, the holy people is Israel. It says he's going to destroy the mighty. That's referring to other powers that are viewed as fairly strong.
Okay.
Okay, and Revelation indicates that as well, and said, people are astonished, saying, who can stand against the beast? Which means that he has conquered somebody, multiple powers. They're like, whoa, nobody can resist him. Okay. But this indicates that he is going to invade and conquer Israel. And I will point out that Erdogan and his son are both calling for that very thing right now. Bilal, who may be the actual better candidate, just organized a massive protest in Istanbul. Where is Istanbul? Well, it's right up there in the middle of that purple. Okay? Just organized a massive demonstration of Muslims calling, literally, formally, if it's the son of the president, saying, we're calling on all Muslim nations to join us in an alliance to invade Israel militarily.
He's done that?
Yeah, that was January 1st. That was 2 weeks ago.
But you
Yeah.
were saying somewhere that they're a long way away.
Well, I said we're at the beginning phases. A lot of prophecy they have not done yet. Okay, but that doesn't mean long time. From going from very little fulfillment to a lot of fulfillment could be very fast.
Everything else.
Yeah. So I don't know, or it could take a long time. I say I'm just watching, which is what Jesus said to do. Okay, who can read 25 for me? The key passage that a lot of people point at.
Through his cunning, sorry. Through his cunning, he deceived to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in heart. He shall destroy many of their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be without human means.
Okay, so through his cunning, now I'm going to focus on the last part. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. So he's not through a military, he's not going to be conquered militarily. He's going to be broken either supernaturally or through some method. People who still want to say, but this is talking about this little horn, that others say that's Antiochus Epiphanes. They point out that Antiochus Epiphanes did not die in battle. He died of a heart attack or health issue. Okay, may have also been poison. But if it was poison, that would be human means. Regardless, this passage really is talking about supernatural. We've seen the statue of Daniel, the feet were destroyed by a rock not cut out by human hands. Okay, and we've seen Daniel 7, the final judgment against that little horn was the Messiah himself. And right before the human means line, it says he shall be the prince of princes. Antiochus Epiphanes didn't do that in any kind of little sense. But the Antichrist, we know, is going to come up against Jesus in the Battle of Armageddon. And then he's going, according to other prophets, destroyed supernaturally. Okay. So the overwhelming evidence for me in this passage, this is not Antiochus, this is future little horn Antichrist. Okay. So let's learn a little more about it. Through his cunning, or the sinister schemes, he shall cause the seat to prosper under his rule. I have studied and watched Erdogan and his son, mostly the father, because there's not a lot of news on the son yet. Just now he's starting to get in the news. But for 10 years now, or 10 years actually, and I've watched him, and he is very deceptive. Okay, he does these things like Another example, okay? He demanded that Europe pay him billions of euros a year just because. He said, because, literally his words, because I'm a prince. Okay. They said, we're not paying you that. And he said, all right, can't stop these migrants from coming into Europe then. All of a sudden there was ISIS attacks all over Europe, things getting blown up, people getting killed, people getting mowed down with cars, churches burning. And then Europe said, okay, we're the billions. And he said, okay, and the ISIS attack stopped. Okay, so the one that just happened in New Orleans most likely was a statement from him to the U.S. saying, I have people, and like I did in Europe, I'm going to do in your country. You guys are going to do what I want. Okay, that was what that message was.
We don't know what he wants yet.
Well, they know what he wants. He's told them. Our government. Okay. Another thing he did is he demanded there was a massive altar called the Altar of Zeus that was dug up by archaeologists from Pergamus in the 1800s and sent to Berlin, and they built an entire museum in Berlin around it. That Altar of Zeus is a massive platform with all these steps and columns and things. It's huge. I mean, it's not like this room by any means. I mean, it's huge. Okay. Hitler recreated that Altar of Zeus to give speeches from. President Obama recreated that altar to give a speech from at the Democrat convention. I think it was in 12 or it was 2008. One of his elections he did. Anyways, Erdogan demanded, and that altar is referred to in the book of Revelation. It's called the seat of Satan. Okay, it's called the seat of Satan in chapter 2 of the book of Revelation. Erdogan demanded that Germany return the seat of Satan to Turkey because it belongs to Turkey, and Berlin said no. Germany said no, we're not. And I think he threatened some ISIS attacks or something else he did, and all of a sudden they closed down the museum, removed the Altar of Zeus, said that they were putting it in the hands of a private collector while they did for about 10 years.
When was this?
That was in the late 2010s, like around 2015, 16, that area, yeah.
The reason why I wasn't there when I was in Berlin and was visiting museums. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, because I was there in 17.
Yeah, no, they shut it down before then, put it in the hands of a private collector, and said they weren't going to open again until 2023. So, I really doubt it's back in. If it's back in there, it's a fake. Okay, he's got the real one now, no doubt. Anyways, here's a key one. So he shall exalt himself in his heart. That's not a question. This line is a key. This is the New King James. It says, he shall destroy many in their prosperity. However, if we go to the same verse in the King James, it says, and by peace he shall destroy many. Okay, very different translation. He shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace he shall destroy many. The New King James says, he shall destroy many in their prosperity. Okay, so what is the correct translation? Well, first let me point out how flimsy a lot of what pastors and churches about prophecy about the Antichrist is. Because raise your hand if you have heard that the Antichrist is going to be a charismatic leader who's going to fool everybody, going to talk about peace, and he's going to sign a peace treaty with Israel for 7 years. And in the middle of that peace treaty, he's going to reveal his true nature and attack Israel at the midpoint. How many people have heard something along those lines?
I've only heard from you. I've never heard a pastor preach it before.
Okay. So I've read lots of books talk about that. You hear people talk about it all the time. Well, there's no verses to support that. Basically, where that comes from is this, peace he shall destroy many. That one verse is responsible. That one, those 5 words there, 6 words, is responsible for that whole thing I just said. There's no other passages. It said, by peace he shall destroy many. By peace. And then they know there's another verse that talks about a covenant, that he enters into a covenant with many. It doesn't say Israel, it says with many. And then they know this earlier part where he says, he shall cause deceit to prosper. So they connect those things and they say, okay, peace, covenant, has to be a peace treaty. Deceitful, we have to have a temple. Has to be a peace treaty with Israel, giving them the right to do the temple. So he's going to do a peace treaty, but it's deceitful. So he's going to break the peace treaty in the middle. And to accomplish that, he has to have political power. To get political power, and because he's deceiving, then everybody must love him. So he's got to be charismatic. That's literally the thought process. That's how they got there. The problem is, the King James is the only translation that says peace.
That's what I was looking, I've got the New King James, and I was looking for that wording, and it's not in here.
It's not, because it doesn't say true. The King James has got a bad translation. Okay, the Hebrew word for peace is shalom. And that's not, the Hebrew word here is not shalom. Okay, I'm going to show you this is the Hebrew here. Right here. In their prosperity, ubasalva, you click on this word, shall destroy many. Prosperity, okay, shalva, this is not shalom. Shalom means peace or well-being. Shalva is different. Tranquility, you can see how they got peace out of it in the King James. Tranquility, prosperity, security, ease. The concept is complacency. You're complacent because you're rich. You've got everything's okay, so you're relaxed. Okay, that's what that means. To be relaxed because I'm got everything I need. Okay, so what the verse really means is, and even the New King James doesn't translate it very well. To say he shall destroy many in their prosperity doesn't really communicate the idea. The correct idea is, through complacency he shall destroy many. Okay, and we can see that in today's world. All the nations of the world, they don't want to go to war. They don't want to stop this guy. Oh, he's attacking Syrians. He's attacking Kurds. Well, yeah, I just want to go to Disneyland. I don't want kids to fight over that. I don't want to stop them. You know, it's not us. Okay, that's complacency. So this verse is saying he's going to destroy people because of complacency. He's going to rise against Jesus himself, Armageddon, and then he's going to be broken without human means. Okay, and then verse 26. Who can read that one for me?
And the vision of the evenings and mornings which told is true. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future.
All right. So evenings and mornings. Remember in the first one it said 2,300 days. Again, in the actual Hebrew it says evening and morning then. Okay, but that is a figure of speech that means day. One evening, one morning, it's a day.
Did it say 2,300
2,000.
days or hours?
It said 20 in the previous section. In the Hebrew it says 2,300 evenings and mornings.
Okay.
And then our translators have replaced that phrase with the word day. Okay. So he's saying that the vision of the 2,300 days is true. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. Seal it up. I mean, write it, seal it. This is about the end times. This is about the very end. Okay? So definitely not Antiochus Epiphanes. And then the last verse says, and I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for days. I arose and went about the king's business. I was astonished by the vision, but no one understood it. He's trying to tell other people. He interprets dreams, and he doesn't understand it. I mean, he has understood it because Gabriel's explained it, but even then, he was for days over what he experienced. Daniel was obviously a man who loved his people, and this was very disturbing to him. He was very disturbed by this nightmare. It was a nightmare vision for him, and we're still reading about it. So I think everything is clear, except for the 2,300 days. What is that? And I have to be honest, I don't know for sure. I'm just going to have to walk you through my guessing. Okay.
Not the verse 26?
No.
It's the same thing.
Well, it
Yeah.
is just referring
But the days is referring to the sacrifices, the daily sacrifices being stopped. Okay. It says in verse 14, it said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Okay. So he's saying that the sacrifices in the temple are going to be stopped. Then after 2,300 days, the temple cleansed. Okay, that's what it's saying. So are those 2,300 days, or are they 2,300 years? Now, so some tried to say, well, this is Antiochus Epiphanes stopping the sacrifice, and then 2,300 years later, it is when the Antichrist, and that's kind of a time. But if that were the case, then that means that the Antichrist will not come until like 2130, not 2025, the year we're in now. We got another 100 years, if that was the interpretation. Okay, but again, we've been looking at and others, people who think it's Antiochus Epiphanes already fulfilled this. Then they would say the 2,300 days were actually days, not years, and it applied to his time. But that doesn't make any sense, because Josephus says that the time that Antiochus Epiphanes stopped the sacrifices to the moment that the temple was cleansed was exactly 3 years. Okay? If you need me to do the here, I'll do it. But 365, 360 on biblical year, Roman year, or actual year, 365 times 3, that's 1,095 days. That's not 2,300 days. So Antiochus Epiphanes did not stop the sacrifices for 2,300 days, only for 1,095. You say, well, it doesn't say days, it says evenings and mornings. So maybe it's half evening and mornings, you add them together, and it's half that number. Okay, so 2,300 divided by 2 is 1,150. So maybe we're getting closer to the amount of time that Antiochus supposedly stopped. Josephus says it was exactly 3 years. Okay, and so that number doesn't match. Okay, and I think that's stretching it to try to say that 1,150 evenings and 1,150 mornings, because the Hebrew phrase really means day, right?
Maybe you just don't want us to know.
Well, and also because it says evening and not the Hebrew word yom, right? Then that would indicate that it really is days and not years. Okay, so the best understanding I have is that this is for the future. That this is for the future. And everything else in this passage is telling for the time of the end. It's for the very end. Okay, so if that's the case, then this passage is indicating the temple in Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt. And they are going to resume the sacrifices at some point. And that this future Antichrist will invade, and he will stop the sacrifices, and it will be 2,300 days until the temple is cleansed. Okay, that is what I think it means. So if that's the case, we can actually figure out a little bit of a time frame. Okay, and this is where I'm going to go pure speculation. But in the book of Revelation, right, we have was it 1,260 days, okay, is mentioned in chapters 11 and 12, talking about the two witnesses, and then the Great Tribulation is 3.5 years, of 1,260 days, right? So the Great Tribulation is the beginning of that is when we see the abomination of desolation in the temple. Jesus himself said that. Again, that's another indication the temple is going to be rebuilt. Do we have any indication that it's happening? Yes. The Jews in Israel today are very close to rebuilding the temple. Okay. I think that certain things may happen with this war that's going on between them and Iran and proxies that will end up being a negotiated peace treaty that does give them the permission to rebuild their temple. Okay. But the Antichrist set up the abomination of desolation at the midpoint, halfway, 3.5 years, which is less than 2,300 days. Okay. he kills the 2 witnesses at the midpoint, which is less than 2,300 days. Up until that point, it says the witnesses kill people with fire arrows. Anyone who comes after the 2 witnesses and tries to kill them will be burned with fire from their mouths. So, based on that, what I'm believing is that if we have 7 years, right, 7 times 365, so we got 2,555 days is 7 years. Okay. So I think what this may be telling us, and again, this is my best guess or understanding, is that at some point there's going to be this treaty, and the Jews are going to be able to build their temple. They're going to build their temple. Maybe they'll build their temple before the treaty is signed. Okay, maybe that would, it doesn't necessarily have, those 2 events don't have to start, but there's going to be some kind of covenant signed that's going to last for 2,555 days. Okay, 255 days after that, perhaps the Antichrist is going to invade Israel and stop. So less than a year after this treaty is signed, he's going to invade Israel and stop the sacrifices in the temple. And then he's going to, and then another number of days go on until you're at the halfway point. He kills the 2 witnesses, sets up the image, the abomination of desolation, and then another 3.5 years go by, and then Jesus returns and cleanses the temple. Does that make sense? So my best understanding is, I believe this may be telling us the timing of when the Antichrist invades Israel to stop the sacrifices, and it's not at the halfway point. I think he's telling us that he's going to invade before the halfway point. His soldiers will continually be killing witnesses until he finally kills the 2 witnesses. And just from the passage alone in Revelation about the 2 witnesses, that has to be true. He has to invade Israel before the midway point, because he's already in place to kill the 2 witnesses at exactly the midpoint. So it's just a question, how many days before then did he invade? Does this make sense? Because that's my best understanding. I believe that's probably what it means, but it is still a mystery. We don't really have a good understanding of that one, but I think the evidence is pretty strong that nothing to do with Rome, and it's not Antiochus Epiphanes, it's the future little horn. Okay? Lots, I said, what do we have questions about? Yes, Sandra.
I can understand in rebuilding the temple. Okay?
Yep.
Rebuilding the temple. But doing sacrifices when they know Jesus took away the need for sacrifice.
But they don't know that.
They don't believe that.
Jews don't believe in there are Messianic Jews who do believe in Jesus, but most of the Jewish people do not believe that.
They don't believe he's.
They don't accept Jesus as the Messiah, and they don't believe that his sacrifice, was the atoning sacrifice. Now, by the way, there are a lot of Christians who are anxiously waiting for the temple to be rebuilt, okay, and looking for it. And there is a prophetic word that you already had, which I do believe is hearing from God, and I know there's questions about what's going on in politics right now, but that's another class, another video. Regardless, in this, if this is a prophetic word from Jesus, he says very clearly that he knows his people are anxious to see these events fulfilled and are going to want to donate to help rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. To speed it up. Okay. He says, if you do that, you will come under a special curse. He says, do not do that. Okay. Christians are not thinking theologically. If you fund the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem so the sacrifices can renew, you are financially saying that Jesus' sacrifice wasn't the final sacrifice. Okay? So, all of your friends who might be excited about it, please warn them. By curse, I do not understand him to mean that you would go to hell, okay, for that. I don't believe that's what he meant by curse. But I mean, I don't know. He just said a special curse. So I would imagine that it's some kind of financial curse. If you're using your finances to fund this, then he'll probably put a curse on your finances. Okay. So, anyways, let's, we got to know, what are you doing? Like, what we got to think about our actions and our word, and what do our actions speak about what we believe, right? You have to, we feel like Christians think they can just do anything, you know, it doesn't really, my choices about where I do business or where I spend my money on are these things that they're not really spiritual decisions, but they are spiritual decisions. You know, we really need to think about that. All right, other questions? Yes.
So if you scroll back, I think it was like 11th or 12th verse.
Yep.
And then you showed us the picture of the map.
Yep.
I've seen that before, and I was just using my mind. Okay, they came south, they went east.
Mm-hmm.
If you set that, to me, it's right there at Istanbul, Turkey.
You're right. That's what makes sense. If you
And
look
we
at
go
that,
south,
that's
into
exactly,
Israel, and then to the east,
yeah.
where he expanded.
right. We go south, Turkey on south, go east to Iraq and Iran even, and then to the glorious land, right? Israel. That matches the prophecy perfectly.
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas if it was Rome, to go south would be to go into the Mediterranean Ocean.
They would go into Egypt.
Yep.
That was
If they didn't drown.
Okay. Other questions?
So we perish for things we don't know. There are few churches that sink a lot of money into Israel.
Yeah.
Send in a lot of money. How will we know, or how can we tell if the money that's given to Israel is for the temple or for the restoration?
So I think that you could, if you're involved with a church who's giving a lot of money towards Israel, you know, the question is, but are they funding exactly? Are they funding missionary activity where you got Messianic Jewish evangelists, you know, trying to witness to other Jewish people? That'd be a wonderful thing to invest funds in. Is it rebuilding the temple? Well, that would be a question to ask that church. You know, what are they giving towards? But keep in mind, it's really a heart issue, okay? And if you're trying to give to a church who's giving Israel because you're wanting to see the kingdom of God advance in Israel, you want to see Jews, you know, find out about Messiah, about Jesus, and somewhere in that process that you don't know about is putting money towards the rebuilding of the temple, God's not going to blame you for that. Okay, that's not your problem. You were trying to do something else. Okay, I think this is applying more to Christians who are trying to act like they're donating directly to, I want the temple rebuilt for sacrifices to resume so we can fulfill prophecy. And even, I think that's why in this prophetic word, assuming I believe it is from God, it's kind of mild. He's not saying you're going to hell. He's going to come under a special curse. You know, you're just not being wise. You're not thinking what you're doing, but you're using your finances incorrectly. You know, and definitely not seeking His will before making that decision.
And
Right.
there are certain organizations that are taking donations just for the temple.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Yeah. I would. You can ask your own church. I wouldn't worry about it too much for you personally, as long as you're not. I think the time this will be a big thing for people is when they're beginning the rebuilding process, and there's going to be a big campaign. Oh, give. Let's hurry prophecy up. You know, I think that's when you really need to warn people. Hey, you realize what you're doing? You're helping reestablish the sacrifices, which are done.
Okay,
So,
current
yes.
events.
Okay, current events. Well, let me show you before we do that. Before we talk about current events, let me. Hold on one second. I gotta hit the camera, the phone here. Sorry. Before we do that, I want to show you a brief video about Erdogan, and then we'll talk about current events. Okay. Just so you can kind of see what kind of guy this guy is. All right. Let's.
Before I begin my next story, I want you to take a look at something. In 2018, the Turkish president held a massive rally in support of Turkish soldiers in Syria. At this rally, he spotted a 6-year-old girl dressed in military camouflage. Erdogan invited her on stage. The girl looked hesitant, but she walked to the podium and gave a salute. And this is what the president told her in front of thousands of his supporters. Listen to this.
We had a maroon beret here, mashallah. She has a Turkish flag in her pocket too. If she's martyred, they'll lay a flag on her, God willing. Be ready for anything.
Did you hear that? If she is martyred, he says, they'll lay a flag on her. Be ready for anything. This happened 2 years back. Why am I sharing this now? To help you understand the state of this leader. He wants to send a 6-year-old to war. He sees children as soldiers, as martyrs. He also sees them as threats and as dissidents, which is why he has put hundreds of children on trial. What was their fault? Insulting President Erdogan. Let's explain this. The Turkish Ministry of Justice has released some figures. This is data on investigations that the government has launched. In the last 6 years, more than 28,000 probes were launched in Turkey. 128,000 probes. What for? To find out who insulted the president. 128,000 investigations on who insulted the president. Out of this, 30,000 complaints have been evaluated and criminal cases have been launched in at least 11,000 cases. If you think this is shocking in a so-called democracy, wait till you hear this. Out of the 11,000 who stood trial for insulting or allegedly insulting President Erdogan, 903 were minors, mostly between the ages of 12 and 16. 900 children on trial for the president. At least 7 of them were handed prison sentences. The youngest to be prosecuted was 12 years old.
Okay, so that's what kind of guy he is. Okay, don't underestimate how evil, whether or not he's the final little horn, he's an Antichrist. I'll tell you that, everything I've watched him do. Okay, so current events, we had a question about, what was your question?
Oh, no, I was ready for you to talk about current
Oh, well, we've had a lot happening. What do y'all want? What's the topics?
Do you feel like the New Orleans attack was, ISIS related, yeah?
Well, he had an ISIS flag on the back of his truck, and he came up from Mexico with a bunch of explosives that were given to him in Mexico by some group down there.
How did they get to our military though?
Well, so that's a little more complicated, okay? Because you had the other guy who supposedly deleted himself or exploded himself in front of the Trump Tower on the same day, right? But there's a lot of questions about that one. Now, the guy, the New Orleans one, is a little more confusing because it does seem like he was radicalized, like he was, but both of them were special forces, and it happened on the same. So I don't know that we're going to ever get enough information out. There's so many things happening. It used to be like you would have one of these things happen, and it was the sole focus of people's attention that all these internet sleuths parrot stuff out, and there'd be whistleblowers and things like this, and after a little bit you could get a picture. But you got the drones and you got the fires and you got and all this stuff replaces these, so that process is kind of being short-circuited, which is why I just tell you, you cannot believe anything you see or hear, even on a quote-unquote conservative, freedom-loving site, because you're getting real information there, but you're having to trust that they haven't been tricked by somebody, okay? Or they're not being fed an artificial intelligence created video. We really can't believe anything we're being. That's true. I look for I think the best we hope for, unless we get a really clear release of document, and whistleblowers and things like this, the best you can hope for is to try to figure out what's not true. Okay. So in the case of the Trump Tower thing, that one was a lot easier because the first thing you listen for is just a story that comes out. Don't ever believe it, okay? Because they come out with all these facts, and there's no way they've had enough time to ascertain their facts, okay? So for example, within a few hours of the Trump Tower explosion, they said that the man had, that they knew he'd acted alone, and that he had detonated the vehicle from inside the vehicle, that he had a mechanism inside the vehicle where he'd self-detonated. They said that within hours of it, okay? Well, where does that information come from? Okay, first of all, when you have an explosive device like that, who is actually looking inside the car at that point? It's only federal agents. Okay, so it's not the local cops who are actually looking, right? As soon as there's an explosion, they're just roping stuff off. They're waiting for the FBI. The FBI comes in. So as the FBI, an FBI agent basically looked in the car, told all of them, yeah, it was a remote detonation. He had thing in here, and that's it. Okay, and then that's what gets repeated over and over and over again. But the same FBI, within 2 hours of the New Orleans attack, was saying it was not a terrorist attack. Okay. The first thing is the FBI lies. And they intentionally lie to the public because of their methodology. Even if you don't want to ascribe anything sinister to it, they've got a standard operating protocol. If something happens that looks like a terrorist attack, you get in front of the camera and you say it is not. Okay, because they don't want the American government looking bad that they permitted one. Okay, and then going forward, and at this time, we do not consider this to be a terrorist attack. Why? Because they feel like we have to prove it. We have to, and how do we prove it? Well, it's not just a terrorist attack because it inspired terror or because of this or that. We have to all the way back to Al-Qaeda through all these financial channels and all this. And if they ever find that out, they're not going to tell you. They're not going to hold a new press conference and say it because they don't reveal their investigation when they're conducting. Okay. So in this case, they couldn't even identify the guy. He was so badly, they said he was so badly burned that they couldn't get him out of the car. The only way they identified him was a few little spots of skin on his stomach that hadn't burned and had a tattoo on it, okay, that they could identify. So he's that badly burned, you haven't even been able to get a car yet. He's just a massive charcoal at this point. And yet somehow, you know he had a remote detonation device without even actually getting him out of the car yet to look at anything. There's been no forensic analysis, and somehow you know this is a fact and it's being repeated. So that's the kind of thing I listened for and I said, well, that's just not true. Everybody's repeating it, but it's not true. They can't know that. And then the next day, the sheriff's department came out and said, yeah, I know for a fact that he shot himself in the head before the explosion. Next logical question. Okay, so now well, how did he do that? Oh, well, we think it had to be what? You think it had to be a timer? Yes, we think it had to be a timer or something like that, or maybe when he released the trigger, I thought you were sure that he did this remotely. You see what I'm saying? Don't trust what they're saying. You have to actually think about it and ask questions. How could they know that? And look at the details, what they are admitting. Okay, so when they admit something that throws their previous statements off, that they don't really want to be true or admit, that's a fact you can usually trust as an actual fact. Okay, and then you had more complicated, and then you have, oh, wait a second, this was a Cybertruck, and it has a self-driving feature. So the truck could have been driven in remotely by someone while he was already passed away in the driver's seat, right? And then Elon Musk pops up and says, no, that's not possible. Our self-driving feature will not work unless the person is awake, and you can see their eyes, they're not, etc. And so he's just like shutting it down, okay? So what does the general public do when he says that? They say, oh, well, that didn't happen. Definitely not the self-drive feature. Elon Musk said it. Second, does Elon Musk have any motivation to shut down the idea that one of his trucks could be self-driven to create an attack? And what he's saying is truthful in general, probably. You know, that's what they say is the design. But can it be circumvented? Well, what if you have a man sitting in the driver's seat, so the there, and he's been left with his eyes open? So the computer, he's awake. Would it distinguish? Okay. And what about intelligence services? You know, if there's a central intelligence agency that is behind this, can they not override his programming, his safety protocols, and do with it what they want? Of course they can, right? So see, the truth is, his statement is, it absolutely could have been self-driven. And then you have these former military guys, military intelligence guys, that supposedly received an email from him days before indicating he'd be leaving on January 1st, and he really needed to talk to him, and he wants to tell him about the drones and how we have all of this, and he's being followed by the Department of Justice, and it's all this other stuff. And anyways, not to make this go on for an hour, you just put it all together and you realize even that email was fake. Most likely, he was being held prisoner by an intelligence agency for whatever reason. He was probably going to be a whistleblower on something. And they already knew this one attack for New Orleans was going to be done. So they were holding him, and they had an agent, I believe, sending out fake emails to all these podcasters to read some kind of crazy reason why he would do this to himself. Okay. And then even in the videos they have of him supposedly driving the Cybertruck down, when he's at the charging stations at night, he's got this massive light hat which prevents the night cameras from being able to see his face. So got his jacket on, but you can't see it's really him. So I think this is a very well run thing, and they basically said, okay, let's just take him out. We'll make it happen in a way that is timed with the others, so people just put them together. And yes, and he was probably, you know, in my opinion, if I was guessing, I'd say maybe he was going to be a whistleblower to Trump. And so the message was sent to Trump to say, hey, your whistleblower is no longer with us. So I don't know. There's a lot of speculation. I just know that you can just ask some basic questions at the beginning, and you realize how little of the narrative is really possibly true. Does that make sense? But we don't really need to figure out all these details anymore. At this point, we just know the country's under judgment. You know, Los Angeles is definitely feeling it. Two principles we can see there is in New Orleans, the people, and this is not to be judging people or saying, you know, they're worse sinners than we are, or whatnot, but the people who were killed were in New Orleans on New Year's Eve partying at 3 a.m. Okay, so if you were, doing more reputable activity, you wouldn't have been at risk. Does that make sense? And in Los Angeles, God has been warning people, move away from these godless population centers, because some of the judgments will take out the whole area, the whole population. And you just don't want to be close by.
So what do you think the probability is that he was behind that New Orleans attack, and you think it will continue? You
I don't-
think that we're being held ransom?
I don't think that I don't think that he is probably. I think he's too high up there to be aware of the detail. I don't think they're talking about the details of it. I think his son runs ISIS, and I think they're we're wanting something from the U.S. and we were resisting, and so he gave an order to his son, hey, send him an attack. And then messages went out to certain sleeper cells and whatever else. I mean, it's usually a pretty convoluted thing. It's, like I said, it's hard to get to them. It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's just bad things are going to happen, and we need to be walking with Jesus. And even with Los Angeles, there's people talking about a lot of little videos where they're seeing space lasers coming down and starting these fires in places that are just popping out of nowhere. Okay, same thing from Hawaii. Well, is that what's happening? It's really hard to prove it. It's probable, but does it matter? I mean, does it matter what actually caused it? I mean, the corruption, we know so much is corrupt. And the cure for Jesus is going to come back, and he's going to set it straight. But the corruption isn't going to be set straight by us exposing truth at this point. It's kind of a worthless, not worth our time. Because you're not going to fix the political system. You're going to fix the corruption in politics or these things. The only thing that's going to fix it is Jesus returning. So we really just need to be spreading the gospel and teaching people to repent and walk with Jesus well. That's the best protection we can give anybody as these things increase. Does that make sense?
Amen.
Y'all agree with that?
Yeah.
All right, any other questions?
Well.
Go for it. Last one, and then we're going to stop the video.
We're not supposed to be worrying about
Yeah.
any of this.
Yeah.
How do you see the difference in the sport with North Carolina versus the sport in California?
From the government or the people?
Why the stop for any help going into North Carolina? What's the purpose?
Well,
Why do you think?
what my understanding is of what's gone on in North Carolina is that there was a lot of radioactive and other toxic chemicals released into the soil. Like the floods, like there was just one location. There was a semi-truck filled with big drum barrels of radioactive waste. Okay, and there was chemical factories and there's other things, and all of this stuff got washed away by the flood, mixed in with all the soil, and the soil is extremely toxic. Okay, and it's really not possible for people to live there anymore from the toxic soil. When they brought in the cadaver dogs, like there was I think 12 cadaver dogs they brought in within the first days to try to find some dead bodies, and 11 of the dogs died within a couple days of first arriving from poison, from just being in the soil. They started to give warnings, say, hey, you guys don't be digging in the dirt. Don't try to dig out your house and things like that and stuff like that. Don't try to be digging around for people. But they stopped those warnings pretty quickly, and this is where the political comes in. My understanding is, this is allegedly, that learned from somebody, I don't know if it was a military advised them or whoever, but they learned pretty quickly that these toxins in the soil and people were going to get cancer and they were going to die and other things and a lot of health problems. And so the FEMA employees just rebelled and said, we're not going to do any work here. We're going to pretend that there's a terrorist threat from domestic terrorists, and we're just going to go back. And we're going to claim it's risk of being attacked, but really it's they didn't want to get sick. But they also aren't going to tell people that. They shut down telling people that, because then they're going to get up in arms about, why was this radioactive waste in a semi-truck up the river? Why were these chemicals like this? Why did this happen?
Yeah, because really it's been a couple of years.
Right.
The toxins.
So I think bottom line is just super selfishness of we're not going to get sick, but we're not going to warn everybody else they're going to get sick, because that will look bad for us. So let's just not go. Okay, we're not going to say anything. And when people need financial assistance, this is how we're going to help them. We're not going to give them any financial assistance. We're going to make sure they have no money to rebuild. We're going to cut down their tiny houses if they try to build any, because it's not good for them to be on this toxic soil. They need to leave the area. But we can't tell them that. So we're going to try to help them by being mean. I think what it is. And then, of course, you can bring in these rumors about the lithium ions and all this stuff. And again, it really doesn't matter. Yep. All right. Well, let's go ahead and pray. We went kind of long today. Mickey, would you close this one?
Heavenly Father, God of Israel, we just thank you for what we've heard tonight, Lord. I just ask that you help us take it in and help us to understand it, and also for anything we can find to seek you and to seek your face. Father, just more than anything, just put a burden on our hearts to share the gospel and spread the gospel of what is coming. And Father, we just ask us all get home safely. Put your angels around us as we drive home, be with everyone, be with their families. And just thank you for Brian and for the word that he gave us this evening. We ask all these things in his name. Amen.
Amen. All right, well, thank you, guys.
So Brian,